What a week it's been. It's been devastating fires, and we were watching the news the other night and saw a friend of ours who had fires come very close to them, and luckily all they lost on a farm and an orchard was basically a water pump. And that's pretty good, isn't it? We have a lot to be thankful for when we live where we live. And I'm sure that as we look at the devastation around us, that we can be thankful that we're not in some of those areas. Let us just bow our heads. Our Heavenly Father, as we come to you this morning, I pray that you'll be with us each one. May the words that I speak be your words, Lord. May we each gain a blessing, I ask in your name. Amen. I was listening to the radio some time ago, and I heard a song come on the radio that I remember hearing when I was quite a bit younger. I think it was popular around the 60s or 70s. And I want to share this song with you. I'm not going to sing it, so don't panic. But I want to share the words with you this morning because it's very biblical. It wasn't meant to be that way, but you'll see as we go through our service that it has a lot to say about what I'm going to talk to you about. And it goes like this. I want to tell you all a story about a Harper Valley widow wife who had a teenage daughter who attended Harper Valley Junior High. Well, her daughter came home one afternoon and didn't even stop to play. She said, "Mum, I got a note here from the Harper Valley PTA." Any of you recognise the song? Okay, the note said, "Mrs. Johnson, you're wearing your dresses way too high. It's reported you've been drinking and running around with men and going wild. And we don't believe you ought to be bringing up your little girl this way." It was signed by the secretary, Harper Valley PTA. Well, it happened that the PTA was going to meet that very afternoon. They were sure surprised when Mrs. Johnson wore her miniskirt into the room. And as she walked up to the blackboard, I still recall the words she had to say. She said, "I'd like to address this meeting of the Harper Valley PTA." And I guess they weren't very impressed with her walking in on their meeting. And she started telling them all their sins and their faults. "Well, there's Bobby Taylor sitting there, and 7 times he's asked me for a date. Mrs. Taylor sure seems to use a lot of ice whenever he's away." You can guess what that was for? For the headaches? Yep. "And Mr. Baker, can you tell us why your secretary had to leave this town? And shouldn't Widow Jones be told to keep her window shades all pulled completely down? Well, Mr. Harper couldn't be here because he stayed too long at Kelly's Bar again. And if you smell Shirley Thompson's breath, you'll find she's had a little nip of gin. Then you have the nerve to tell me you think that as a mother I'm not fit. Well, this is just a little Peyton Place, and you're all Harper Valley hypocrites." Just keep that word in mind too, the hypocrites. Now, I wouldn't put you on because it really did. It happened just this way, the day my mama socked it to the Harper Valley PTA. What goes through your mind when you think about those words? I'd like you to take your Bibles and come with me to Luke chapter 6, and we're going to read some verses and look at them here this morning. Luke 6, starting at verse 37. It's amazing how things spark things in your own mind, isn't it? You hear this, and I'd heard it time and time again. It wasn't for one day, just recently I heard it, and I thought, man, that's so biblical and so true, that we like to point out the faults in others and don't worry about ourselves. Okay, Luke 6 and verse 37 through to 42. "Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven." The first word there, judge. Judge not. Don't judge others. In so doing, you are judging yourself. It's easy, isn't it, to point the finger at somebody else? It's easy to do. We find it so easy. We find it comes easily to judge and criticise others. But when we criticise and judge, we are actually saying that we are better than the other person. If I'm putting you down, it makes me look better. And so if I judge you as being bad, then I must be that little bit better to be able to do that. What gives me the right to do that? It's so simple and easy to do. And in doing this, the second word in that verse that stands out is the condemnation. Judgment and condemnation. Very similar, aren't they? When we judge someone, we are condemning them as well. We're condemning their actions. In condemning someone else, we are actually condemning ourselves. It's like as if we we pronounce it out there, but it's actually for us as well. I'd like to just share with you, to explain this here, how simple it is to misjudge people. Have you ever done that? Misjudge somebody? Got the wrong idea about something? Yep, we do it all the time. Just recently when we went to Tasmania, we decided to drive up onto Mount... I've forgotten it. Behind Hobart, Wellington. And it's 22 kilometres up, climbing the whole way. And it had snowed just the day before, so that's the reason we wanted to go and have a look around. We had our little camper van, and it had these extended mirrors out the side so you could see what was going on around you. We got to the top, we pulled in, and we're sitting there, and it was freezing cold. The wind was howling through, and there's snow lying around everywhere. And we're sitting there getting the beanies ready and the gloves and so on. A Tarago van had followed us up the road and pulled in directly beside us. And this guy driving this Tarago van, he was the meanest looking dude you've ever seen. He was just so mean looking. Took one look at him and I thought, man, I wouldn't want to meet him in a dark alley. He had dreadlocks down to here. And he was just the appearance. And I was keeping my eye on him. And he decided to get out of his van, so he opened his door, and as he did, the wind caught it, and it came round, bang, knocked one of our mirrors flying off the van. Now, when we had hired this van, we didn't take out extra insurance. We thought, no, we'll take the chance, we'll be careful. Here's a mirror just gone flying. And I looked at this guy and I thought, what do I do? And so I thought, well, I've got to let him know how I feel. You've got to do that, don't you? So I got out and I walked around, I picked the mirror up. The mirror itself hadn't broken, it had only just broken the bracket. And I picked it up, and in a voice that he could hear, and I made sure he could hear it, "Oh, I've got to pay for that now," I said. And this kind, gentle voice said, "Oh no, it was my fault. I've got to pay for it." And I thought, wow. Here I am judging this guy as being this mean dude, and he's so gentle. And he took out a piece of paper and he wrote down all his details for us. We finished up, we didn't have to pay for the mirror because it was a fault in the brackets. But when I got home, I opened up the piece of paper he'd given me with all his details on to just let him know that everything was okay, he didn't have to pay any money. And when I took it out, it was folded over like this, and I took it out, and I looked at that, and I thought, oh, there's something on the back. What do you think was on the back of it? Church program, like Lynn's got here to tell us what to do. It was a church program. This man was a Christian guy, and we'd found out when we were talking to him that he'd driven all the way down from Cape York with a carload of Torres Strait Islanders that had never been down that way before. And here these kids were having a ball in the snow. They were getting it, they were rolling in it, they were stuffing it up each other's jumpers and down the fronts and so on. Here's a Christian guy, but I misjudged him. We have to be so careful. And I've done it in other situations where I've seen something and I think, I should do something about that. I maybe take it to the church board, but realise afterwards what I thought I was seeing, I wasn't seeing. So we are told not to judge or not to condemn. The other part of that verse, the third thing that it says, is forgiveness. Now, how easy is it for us to forgive? If somebody really does something wrong and bad to us, how easy is it for us to forgive that person? It's not easy. But forgive we must. If we repeat the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts as we forgive those who trespass against us. If we want to be forgiven, then we need to forgive others. Even Jesus hanging on the cross, what did he say? Those people that had persecuted him, those people that had done all those horrible things to him, he looked at them and he said, Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. Forgive them. Could you forgive them in that situation? Verse 38, give and it will be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together and running over, will be put into your bosom, for with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. This is good advice. The way we give to others is the way we'll receive back. The Bible also tells us, we won't bother turning there, but in Matthew 5, it talks about going the second mile. If you are compelled to or asked to go 1 mile, go 2 miles. Go the extra mile. Do the little bit extra. But it says, give good measure, pressed down, shaken together and running over. Does that have much bearing on us today? Like, what do you take from that? What do you understand from that? Back in those days, there wasn't a lot of scales for weighing things, and so a lot of stuff was sold or given by measure, like it might be a bag that was a certain size, and that would be, for instance, a bushel. It wasn't necessarily the weight, but the size of the bag. Now, if, for instance, you were supplying somebody some beans in a bag, it would be very easy to just put them in roughly. The bag looks full, and here's your bushel of beans. But what happens as you take that home? Shakes around, goes down, you find you've got this much room at the top. Now, this used to happen. There's all sorts of ways we can cheat people out of what really is theirs. But this is saying, give the good measure. You put it in, you press it down, you shake it down. Make sure that there's plenty there and leave it running over. When I worked with my dad on the fruit run, he always encouraged to make sure there was over, not under, when we weighed stuff out. Just that little bit extra. Why do we do that? Okay, the Bible says we need to, but it's because what I do to others is what will come back to me. You want people to do their little extras for you, then do it to others. But we tend to have this idea, well, we'll try and make a few more dollars by keeping a little bit back and putting it somewhere else. If you think about it, you save a little bit on each bag of beans, you can have another bag of beans to sell. And so that's greed, isn't it? If we just sum up these two verses, we could sum them up with what it says in Luke 6 and verse 31. Just come back to verse 31. And just as you want men to do to you, you also do to them likewise. So the golden rule. Do to others what you would have them do to you. Good advice. I want to share with you a few words here from the book Thoughts from the Mount of Blessing, talking about this passage. The atmosphere of selfish and narrow criticism stifles the noble and generous emotions and causes men to become self-centered judges and petty spies. The Pharisees were of this class. They came forth from their religious services, not humbled with a sense of their own weakness, not grateful for the great privileges that God had given them. They came forth filled with a spiritual pride, and their theme was myself, my feelings, my knowledge, my ways. Their own attainments became the standard by which they judged others. Putting on the robes of self-dignity, they mounted the judgment seat to criticise and condemn. It was in reference to this spirit and practice that Jesus said, "Judge not, that ye be not judged." That is, do not set yourself up as a standard. Do not make your opinions, your views of duty, your interpretations of Scripture a criterion for others, and in your heart condemn them if they do not come up to your ideal. Do not criticise others, conjecturing as to their motives and passing judgment upon them. To him alone who knows the secret springs of action and who deals tenderly and compassionately is it given to decide the case of every soul. Those who condemn or criticise others proclaim themselves guilty, for they do the same things. Get that? If I pronounce somebody else guilty, then I'm pronouncing a judgment on myself. In condemning others, they are passing sentence upon themselves, and God declares that this sentence is just. He accepts their own verdict against themselves. These clumsy feet, still in the mire, go crushing blossoms without end. These hard, well-meaning hands we thrust among the heartstrings of a friend. Sobering, isn't it? Back to our text. Let's look now at verses 39 and 40. And he spoke a parable to them. Can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into the ditch? The disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is perfectly trained will be like his teacher. Let me tell you a parable, Jesus says. Now we know what a parable is. It's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. It's not always something that has actually happened, but it could have happened. And when we go further into it, we'll see that this is not real. It's just an illustration, this particular one. He spoke a parable, and this parable is something that we can understand that will have a spiritual meaning for us. Jesus asks the question, can the blind lead the blind? And the answer is no. Of course not. Blind people can do amazing things. And as I think back, I think of a good old friend of mine that we used to call and see every week on the fruit run with Dad. His name was Timmy. Amazing old man. He'd lost his sight later in life. But this old man, we tried different times to... we'd had to go past his dairy farm and up the road a bit further to another farm and then come back. And Dad used to say to me, if I was with him, I wasn't with him every week, but Dad used to say to me, see how long it is before old Timmy knows that I've got somebody with me. Now, he's a blind man, used to sit near his dairy farm, and we would try. And Dad would pull up the truck when he came back, and he would get out and I'd stay in the truck. And he'd walk towards Timmy, and Timmy would say, you've got somebody with you today, George, haven't you? How did you know? I heard you talking as you went past. Now, think about an old truck, rattles everywhere, dirt and gravel road, and yet he would hear us saying something to each other as we went past. Or he'd hear a cough or something. This man was so amazing. The house was sitting back off the road, the dairy was at the front, and there was a fence went between the two. This old man used to go out and milk his own cows. He had help as well. Now, have any of you worked on a dairy farm? No? Yes. Okay, I better be careful what I say then, or Enid will tell me I'm not right. Enid, cows are all different, aren't they? They respond differently, and in a milking situation, you've got to handle them differently. How is a blind man going to do that? He used to find his way out to the dairy. He would come out of his door in the house, and he would count the panels of fence, a barbed wire fence, but he'd count the panels of fence. When he got up, I think it was 19 or 20 panels, he knew he had to go through the fence, head in a direction, and there would be the dairy. He would do that. He would milk his own cows. He knew the ones that had to be treated in a certain way, by feel. There used to be milk cans put on his stand for other dairies close by. And he used to sort the cans out. He'd have all of this man's cans together, the other lot, and then his lot, and he'd take them inside. And my dad said to him one day, Timmy, how do you know you've got the right cans? And he got worried for a minute. He said, I have, haven't I? And Dad said, yeah, of course. But how do you know? And each can has got the initials painted on the top of it. And Dad thought, oh, maybe he feels that. No. And he said to Dad, go over there and pick up one of the cans and I'll tell you whose it is. And he picked it up and he said, now drop it. And listen to the sound it makes. It makes a certain sound. Now pick up another one and drop it. And there was a very slight difference in the ring that each one made. Amazing what blind people can do. But could he have led us and shown us around his property? He probably would have had a pretty good go at it, but he can't really lead us anywhere, can he? So the blind cannot lead the blind. Is a disciple above his teacher? Or putting it another way, is a student above the one that has taught him? Are students at school above their teachers? No, not at all. But the verse says, but if they are perfectly trained, they will be like the teacher or the one that has taught them. If they are perfectly trained. How do we become perfectly trained? Or as another way of putting it, we could say a chip off the old block. We've heard that saying before. They might actually start looking like this person that has trained them. They might act like the person. They will talk like the person. They will have some of the same mannerisms. And I'm sure over the years we have seen people that have been trained by certain pastors, and you will watch them up here preaching, and they'll have certain mannerisms that others, the ones that have taught them, have had as well. And I guess there's a little thing here that we need to be careful of, is that kids, as they're growing up, copy what they see. So it's something that parents need to be aware of as well, that they are teaching their children, and they need to be careful what they teach. They need to teach them perfectly, and that's not always easy. And it's interesting to watch how kids take on the things of the parents. And I've told you before about how I remember seeing my dad walking up to a certain spot and having a look out over the paddock. And my brother walked up and stood beside him, did exactly the same thing. And a little 2-year-old nephew came up, walked up a little bit later and stood exactly the same way. We tend to just follow what our parents do. So parents, we need to be careful. Little Daisy, we've been watching her. Karina had this way of sitting when she was little. I'm not even going to attempt to try and do it. I'd break my legs or something. She used to sit with her feet splayed out. Sit on her knees with her feet splayed out like this. And she used to do something with her toes. I can't even get it right now. She used to get a big toe and she'd pull her other toe down like that somehow. Little Daisy is doing exactly the same thing. She comes in, she crawls around and walks around a little bit now too, and she will plonk herself down, feet splayed out, and the toes are going. just like a mother used to do. Parents, we need to be careful what we are teaching and training our kids. If they pick that sort of stuff up, what else are they going to pick up? These are things that don't really matter, but what else are they going to pick up? Let's move on. Verse 41. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but not perceive the plank in your own eye? Why do I look at the speck? Maybe it's in someone else's eye, something small, insignificant, maybe something that's not worth worrying about. Why do I look at it? And the speck, what does that word speck mean? Well, it can mean a few things, but it's basically saying that it's a little dry twig. Can you see it? A little dry twig. Now, why am I concerned about something like that in your eye? Now, physically, yes, if you had something in your eye like that, we'd need to sort of help you with it. But we're talking spiritually here. The verse says, refers to the plank. What does the plank mean? What is a plank? Yes, Cheryl, it can be big. The meaning of it is through the idea of holding something up. So we have the planks that hold up buildings. A plank. And this is only a very short plank. And I think probably what was meant was actually something bigger. Now, if I've got a plank in my eyes, can I see to help somebody with this in their eyes? It's a bit hard. It's not bad here, I can't see anybody. I can hide. Plank, speck. And this is what this verse is getting at. Something big in my own eyes is stopping me from seeing what's in somebody else's eyes. The comparison, something small, something very large. The verse says, why do you look at it? Why do you even take the time to do it? Behold, be aware, but don't perceive. We're a little bit like, sometimes when we see something in somebody else and we don't realise that this is in our eye, we feel that that person needs to be told about something. They need to be told to whatever. You know, they come to church, we may feel the need to say to them, you need to dress differently. But how can I do that if I've got this in my eye? We're a little bit like, and we don't like to let it go. Have you seen a young dog, not a young dog, but like a terrier dog, going at something that they really don't want to let go of? What do? They hang on and they do not let it go. And sometimes in a church situation, we can be a little bit the same. We see something we don't like and we will not let it go. I had a dog when I was a kid and she was, better be careful, a little bit overweight. But what she loved was getting out chasing rats and mice. That weight didn't worry her at all when there was rats or mice around. And she just wouldn't let go of this situation. She would go and go and go. And I remember once going up behind the shed, we saw some rats go in underneath some galvanised iron we had laying there. And Dad said, get the dog, let's get onto these. And as we pulled the sheets back, these rats would run. And she would be in there and she'd get them, kill them, go for the next one. Finished up in a very short period of time. She had over 30 rats that she'd killed. Yet you'd try and take this dog for a walk and she'd hang back. She would walk, but she didn't want to go. But when she had her mind made up and focused on something, she wouldn't let go of it. Now with us, that can be a good thing in some ways too, but be careful. If we've got something in our own eyes and going after something in somebody else, be careful. Verse 42, or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck that is in your eye, when you yourself do not see the plank that is in your own eye? Hypocrite. Remember I said, listen out for that word, hypocrite. First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck that is in your brother's eye. Could you imagine me saying to someone, I know you've got a little problem there, you've got something in your eye, do you want me to help you get it out? What would you think? Couldn't do much, could I? Sometimes there are things that people need us to help them with. We need to be careful when we're dealing with the eyes. The eyes are so important to us. Do you feel your eyes are important? Would you like to be without your eyes? I know I wouldn't. And we need to look after them, and we try to, inadvertently, you know, if we go out in the sun, we shade our eyes. We wear dark glasses when we're outside to protect our eyes. It has been said that the eyes are the window of the soul. Very important. The eyes indicate the antiquity of the soul, Ralph Waldo Emerson said. Most people are visual in the way they take things in, and so that is important to remember as well when we're thinking about the eyes. Take things in different ways, and most people, as I said, are visual. So how well do we see if we've got something in our eyes? If you have something in your eye, and we won't go to this extreme, but you get something small in your eye, you've got to do something about it, don't you? I've got to do something with it. You've got to get it out. And it might just be something tiny. And usually it's the tiny stuff. A grain of sand or a grain of dust or something in the eye is so annoying. My dad was one of the best, I guess, at taking things out of your eye. If you've got something in your eye, Dad was good. And he had, the first way you'd go about doing it, he would make sure he had a clean handkerchief, and he'd take his hanky like this, and he would just fold it like that. So you've got this little part here. Now, first aiders will probably tell you this is not the way to do it, but it worked well. And he would pull the eyelid down, and he would just scrape out whatever it was that was in the eye, being very gentle not to damage the eye, of course. If he didn't have a clean handkerchief around, a little blade of grass, you know how you pull some grass and it pulls out of the rest of the plant, and it's got a very soft end to it, and he would use that sometimes. If I have something in my eye that's bothering me, it's me that needs to do something about it. Sure, I might need you to help me with it, or somebody else to help me with it, but I'm the one that has to make that decision. It's not your decision to do it. It's bothering me, no one else. And as I said, I may need help, but the decision is mine. The verse says to deal with our own eyes first. Get our own problems sorted out. If we see something in someone else which annoys us, or that we don't agree with, check what we might be doing in our own life. Is there a plank there that needs removing? It's easy to see problems in others, but what about our own selves? More here from thoughts from the Mount of Blessing. Why beholdest thou the mote in thy brother's eye? Matthew 7:3. It's parallel verse. Even the sentence, thou that judgest does the same things, does not reach the magnitude of his sin who presumes to criticise and condemn his brother. Jesus said, why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but consider not the beam that is in thy own eyes? His words describe one who is swift to discern a defect in others. When he thinks he has detected a flaw in the character of the life of he is exceedingly zealous in trying to point it out. But Jesus declares that the very trait of character developed in doing this unchristlike work is, in comparison with the fault criticised, as a beam in proportion to the mote. It is one's own lack of spirit of forbearance and love that leads him to make a world, get this, to make a world out of an atom. But you and I wouldn't do that, would we? Maybe not. Maybe we do, and I think we do, if we're honest. So as we think about this, I think I've gone one page. Yeah, okay. As we think about these verses, I want us to think more spiritually now. And think about what are some of these beams that could be in our own eyes. What do you think some of these beams we could have in our own eyes? If we go back to verse 37, it tells us quite clearly that judgment, condemnation, having an unforgiving heart, and being dishonest. Do we have those sorts of things in our own life? Are they the sorts of things that unfortunately we as sinners do? We do judge, we condemn. We're not always willing to forgive. And we can add to that criticism, arrogance, pride, selfishness, probably some others we could think of too. I want you to think about these this morning. Do I have any of these in my heart, in my life, in my eyes, or in my life? Do we see some of these things in ourselves sometime when dealing with church members? Do some of these things get in the way at church? Later this year, we could have people turning up from the community on Sabbath mornings. Let's hope we do, walking through that door out there. How will we react if someone turns up with a different dress code to what we think they should be wearing? Think about this. How will we react? What if someone turns up here and maybe smelling a little bit of alcohol? What's going to be our reaction? What if someone turns up who hasn't shaved or showered for a week? What will be your response? What will be my response? Will we give them a lecture in how to dress, or the importance of cleanliness, or the importance of not smoking or drinking? I hope not. Or will we welcome all newcomers with open arms? Or will we prejudge and condemn? So what's important to us? A church half full of perfectly dressed saints, or a church full of people loving the Lord and wanting to get to know him better? What's more important? There's a verse in Romans, and I'm not going to turn to it because I want to read it from the New Living Translation, Romans 14 and verses 1 to 4. And it simply says, accept other believers who are weak in faith and don't argue with them about what they think is right or wrong. For instance, one person believes it's all right to eat anything, but another believes with a sensitive conscience will eat only vegetables. Those who feel free to eat anything must not look down on those who don't. And those who don't eat certain foods must not condemn those who do, for God has accepted them. Who are you to condemn someone else? Christ is the only true standard of character, and he who sets himself up as a standard for others is putting himself in the place of Christ. This is the problem we have when we start judging and prejudging. The sin that leads to the most unhappy results is the cold, critical, unforgiving spirit that characterises Pharisaism. When the religious experience is devoid of love, Jesus is not there. The sunshine of his presence is not there. No busy activity or Christ-like zeal can supply the lack. There may be a wonderful keenness and perception to discover the defects of others, but to everyone who indulges this spirit, Jesus says, "Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt you see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye. He who is guilty of wrong is the first to suspect wrong. By condemning another, he is trying to conceal or excuse the evil of his own heart." When men indulge this accusing spirit, they are not satisfied with pointing out what they suppose to be a defect in their brother. If milder means fail of making him do what they think ought to be done, they will resort to compulsion. Just as far as lies in their power, they will force men to comply with their ideas of what is right. This is what the Jews did in the days of Christ, and what the church has done ever since when she has lost the grace of Christ. Christ does not drive, but draws all men to him. The only compulsion which he employs is the constraint of love. This morning, as we consider this, I want us to take it to heart that yes, if we have people coming through here, we need to be very careful how we react and how we approach these people. Let's start by doing it with each other. Instead of criticising, condemning, or pointing out faults in others, let's deal with ourselves, sort our own selves out. And if somebody comes to us and asks for some sort of help with something else, then and only then can we help that person. Thank you.